Handheld gaming has been a huge part of my life since my childhood. From the Game Boy Advance, to the PSP, and now, the Nintendo Switch. I've always loved the freedom and flexibility that handheld gaming has offered. Whether you're commuting, relaxing on the couch, lying in bed, or just looking to play something while watching your favorite TV shows. Handheld gaming has been a staple for many gamers for decades. Today, we're taking a journey through time to explore the history of handheld gaming and how we've gone from simple, single-game devices to powerful handhelds like the Valve Steam Deck, which lets you carry your entire PC game library with you on the go. The origins of handheld gaming can be traced back to the late 1970s and early 1980s. The first handheld gaming devices were simple, offering only one game per device with very basic graphics and gameplay. These early devices were more like portable toys rather than handheld gaming consoles, but they set the foundation for what was to come. One of the first major players in handheld gaming was Mattel, which introduced a series of handheld sports games like baseball and football. These devices had simple LED screens that displayed lights to represent players and actions. Another pioneer during this time was Coleco, which released handheld devices for games like Mrs. Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. Although simple graphically and offering basic controls, these early handhelds proved that there was a market for handheld gaming devices. They demonstrated that handheld gaming could be fun and addictive, even without the technological power of home consoles. But perhaps the most significant handheld devices from this early era were Nintendo's Game & Watch series. Launching in 1980, the Game & Watch devices featured a small LCD screen and offered a single game. These devices also came with a clock, hence the name. Nintendo released dozens of these devices, including titles like Donkey Kong, Popeye, and Snoopy Tennis. While the gameplay was still very basic, often involving just a few buttons for jumping or dodging, these devices continued to widen the market for handheld gaming. They were lightweight, affordable, and easy to carry around, which made them ideal for people on the go. But more importantly, they laid the groundwork for what would come next. Multi-game systems with better graphics, more controls, and even color screens. The real revolution in handheld gaming arrived in 1989, with the launch of the Nintendo Game Boy. Although Milton Bradley had released the Microvision in 1979, which was the first handheld to feature interchangeable cartridges, it wasn't until the Game Boy that the concept of portable gaming systems with a swappable library of games truly took off. The Game Boy was revolutionary for its time. It featured a 160 by 144 pixel monochrome screen with a greenish tint that would become iconic. The design was compact yet sturdy, with a simple yet effective control scheme that mimicked the layout of the Nintendo Entertainment System. A D-pad, A and B buttons, and start and select. This made the transition from home console gaming to handheld gaming seamless for many players. The non-backlit LCD display, although a limitation, actually contributed to one of the Game Boy's greatest strengths, its battery life. At the time, when other handheld systems such as the Atari Lynx, Turbo Express, and Sega Game Gear were pushing forward with color displays and better graphics, the Game Boy prioritized longevity and portability. It could run for up to 10 to 12 hours on just 4 AA batteries, whereas its competitors often needed more power and lasted for far fewer hours. This made the Game Boy the go-to device for long trips or extended gaming sessions on the go. But what really set the Game Boy apart wasn't just its hardware. It was its library of games. From the start, Nintendo delivered top-tier titles that kept players engaged for hours. Tetris, which came bundled with the Game Boy in many regions, was a global phenomenon and is often credited with driving the early success of the system. The Game Boy also saw the birth of iconic franchises like Kirby, with the release of Kirby's Dreamland, and Pokémon, with the releases of Red and Green or Blue in the West. But of course, we can't forget about Super Mario Land and Zelda Link's Awakening. These games all contributed to turning the Game Boy into a cultural juggernaut. Over its lifetime, the Game Boy sold more than 118 million units worldwide, including the Game Boy Color, which we'll talk about later. Despite competition from more technologically advanced devices, The Game Boy's strong game lineup, affordable price, and long battery life made it the dominant force in handheld gaming for over a decade. Even though the Game Boy was a runaway success, it wasn't the only handheld system in the market. In 1989, the same year as the Game Boy's release, Atari launched the Atari Lynx, which was the first handheld console with a backlit color screen. The Lynx also boasted a more powerful processor than the Game Boy, allowing it to produce better graphics and support more complex games. However, despite its technological superiority, the Lynx struggled for several reasons. For one, it was significantly more expensive than the Game Boy, and its battery life was much shorter, requiring 6 AA batteries, which lasted only a few hours. Additionally, while it had a decent selection of games like California Games, Blue Lightning, and Pac-Land, it didn't garner quite the same support of developers like that of the Game Boy. Not long after Atari and Nintendo released their consoles, Sega threw its hat into the handheld ring with the release of the Sega Game Gear in 1990. Like the Lynx, the Game Gear featured a color screen and offered backlit capabilities, which made it more visually appealing than the Game Boy in many ways. The Game Gear was essentially a portable version of Sega's Master System console and had access to popular titles like Sonic the Hedgehog, Shinobi, and Mortal Kombat. However, the Game Gear also suffered from similar issues that the Lynx did. Its battery life was notoriously bad, lasting only 3 to 5 hours on 6 AA batteries, and it was bulkier than the Game Boy, making it less convenient to carry around. While the Game Gear did sell relatively well, reaching approximately 10 million units, it couldn't match the Game Boy's sales or cultural impact. The Turbo Express, also released in 1990, and it was essentially a handheld version of the TurboGrafx 16. The handheld was pretty technologically advanced for the time, but it came in at a high price compared to its competitors and ultimately failed to carve out a large market share. Despite the technological advances of the Atari Lynx, Turbo Express, and Sega Game Gear, Nintendo's focus on simplicity, battery efficiency, and a killer game lineup allowed the Game Boy to come out on top in the first major battle of handheld consoles. In 1998, almost a decade after the launch of the original Game Boy, Nintendo introduced the Game Boy Color. This wasn't just a cosmetic upgrade. It was a substantial improvement in terms of power and display. The Game Boy Color featured a non-backlit color screen and backwards compatibility with the original Game Boy, which meant players could enjoy both classic Game Boy titles and new titles in color on Nintendo's new device. The Game Boy Color's library featured many standout titles, including Pokémon Gold and Silver, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, and The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Seasons. These games brought more detailed worlds and richer gameplay experiences, cementing the Game Boy's position as the king of handheld gaming. Despite stiff competition from devices like SNK's Neo Geo Pocket Color and Bandai's WonderSwan, which only released in Japan, the Game Boy Color sold 45 million units on its own worldwide, and continued Nintendo's dominance in the handheld market. By the early 2000s, handheld gaming was entering what many consider to be its golden age. In 2001, Nintendo launched the Game Boy Advance, a 32-bit handheld system that was a massive leap forward in terms of power and performance from the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Advance featured a wider, more vibrant 240 by 160 pixel screen and introduced players to more complex and detailed games. Games like Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green, The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap, Metroid Fusion, and Castlevania: Aria of Sorrow showed off what the system was capable of, offering near-home console quality experiences in the palm of your hand. The Game Boy Advance also retained backwards compatibility with Game Boy and Game Boy Color titles, further expanding its already impressive library. But Nintendo wasn't the only player in the handheld space during this time. In 2004, Sony made its first attempt in handheld gaming, after gaining widespread success in the home console market with the PlayStation and PlayStation 2, by releasing the PlayStation Portable. The PlayStation Portable was a technological marvel, offering near PlayStation 2 quality graphics, multimedia capabilities like movies, music, and web browsing, and a sleek, modern design. The PlayStation Portable had standout titles like God of War: Chains of Olympus, Crisis Core: Final Fantasy VII, Grand Theft Auto: Liberty City Stories, and Metal Gear Solid: Peace Walker. It was a bold attempt by Sony to bring home console quality gaming to a handheld, and it worked. While the PlayStation Portable sold over 80 million units worldwide, it couldn't topple Nintendo's next major handheld innovation. In 2004, Nintendo introduced the Nintendo DS, a device that would go on to become the best-selling handheld console of all time. The DS was a dual-screen device, one of which was a touchscreen which offered a completely new way to interact with games. It also featured a microphone for voice commands and wireless connectivity, which allowed for local multiplayer and even online play in some games. The DS's game library was just as impressive as its innovative hardware. Titles like Nintendogs, Brain Age, New Super Mario Bros., and The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass introduced fresh gameplay mechanics that took advantage of the touchscreen. Meanwhile, classics like Mario Kart DS, Animal Crossing Wild World, and Pokémon Diamond and Pearl continued to push the boundaries of what handheld gaming could be. The Nintendo DS sold an astounding 154 million units worldwide, making it one of the most successful gaming consoles of all time, second only to the PlayStation 2. But Nintendo wasn't done with its handheld journey. In 2011, Nintendo released the successor to the DS, titled the Nintendo 3DS, which introduced glasses-free 3D technology. Despite a slow start, the 3DS eventually found its footing with games like Super Mario 3D Land, Mario Kart 7, Fire Emblem Awakening, Super Smash Bros., and Animal Crossing New Leaf. The system also benefited from backwards compatibility with DS games and access to the Nintendo eShop, which allowed for digital purchases. The system also gave players access to a virtual console, featuring many different titles across the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Sega Game Gear, NES, and SNES. However, Sony's next handheld, the PlayStation Vita, which also launched in 2011, was less successful. The Vita featured an OLED screen, dual analog sticks, and impressive hardware. It even had cross-platform play with the PlayStation 4. Despite its potential, the Vita struggled due to a lack of first-party support and the rise of mobile gaming. It only sold around 16 million units during its 8-year lifespan, but has since gained a cult following. Fast forward to 2017, and Nintendo once again redefined the handheld market with the launch of the Nintendo Switch, a hybrid console that could be used both as a home console and a handheld device. This versatility made the console incredibly popular, and Nintendo was able to rebound from their failed Wii U console. The original Switch boasted a 6.2-inch touchscreen display, 3 to 6 hours of battery life, and 2 detachable Joy-Cons. But like most Nintendo consoles, what really sets the Switch apart is its massive library of games, featuring incredible first-party titles and massive third-party support. Titles like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Fire Emblem Three Houses, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and Animal Crossing New Horizons have become massive successes. As of the writing of this video, the Nintendo Switch has sold over 143 million units, cementing its place as one of the best-selling consoles of all time. Its ability to seamlessly switch between handheld and dock mode has resonated with a wide audience, from casual gamers to hardcore fans. The success of the Nintendo Switch has sparked a new era of handheld gaming. Now, we're seeing the rise of PC handhelds, led by devices like the Valve Steam Deck. Released in 2022, the Steam Deck allows players to carry their entire PC game library with them on the go. It's a powerful device, capable of running AAA games that were previously reserved for desktops, laptops, and home consoles. The Steam Deck has sparked interest in other PC handhelds, such as the Asus ROG Ally and Lenovo Legion Go. While these devices are still relatively niche, they represent the next big leap in portable gaming, offering more power, flexibility, and portability than ever before. With the rise of cloud gaming and advances in hardware, the future of handheld gaming looks incredibly bright. We could soon see even more powerful handhelds, with better battery life, cloud integration, and new ways to play wherever you are. From the early days of LCD-based devices in the 1980s, to the technological marvels we see today, handheld gaming has come a long way. Whether you're nostalgic for the Game Boy or excited about the potential of PC handhelds, one thing is clear: handheld gaming is here to stay. My name is Doodad. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day.